Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Can you hear
Okay.
me well?
Dear participants of the Brics International School, we are going to the economic track, and now it's my honor to present you our Brazilian economist, vice president of the New Development Bank from 2015 and 2017, executive director for Brazil and other countries in the International Monetary Fund. Please, your bosses to Paulo Nogueira Batista Jr. Mr. Batista, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I cannot hear you very well, but can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
So first of all, let me thank the organizers for inviting me to speak with you today. I regret not being able to be in person, but I hope this online will work well. I often see that online participation works very well. I hope you can hear me and see me well. If not, let me know. Now, I noticed that the general title of your seminar is Brics International School New Generation. I can't see the audience, but I was told that you are mostly in the range of 18 to 35 years old, which is fine, because I think we need to see the BRICS as a long-term project mainly, not be too immediatist like Brazilians sometimes are. We must have this long view that I think are more typical of the Chinese than of Brazilians and others. Why is a long view needed? Because we have many obstacles to overcome to become effective in terms of international relations as a group. And there's a caveat here that I want to make. I'm a beginner. I was one of the beginners of the BRICS process back in 2008 when we first started. And I believe I have some lessons of experience to tell you. But on the other hand, I'm fully aware that the world is changing so fast, like never before, that the lessons of experience are becoming less and less useful, perhaps, because what you learned, say, in 2008, 2010, may no longer be as relevant as what you see now, to what we see now, given this rapid pace of change. In any case, I've been trying to keep up with the facts about BRICS, and I will speak. You asked me to speak on BRICS economy, origins and impact on world economy, trade, investment, and finance. I will speak more on the current and future challenges that the group faces, that the BRICS face, and less on the history since 2008, including because Victoria Panova has already spoken about this earlier to you. So what's the impact of the BRICS on the world economy? It's enormous, given the simple, obvious fact that 5 of its members are among the larger countries in the world. I mean, I'm talking about the 4 original members, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and the more recent member that joined in January this year, Indonesia. If you look at the countries of the world, I have a table here. The 4 original members, as well as Indonesia, are part of the top 10 countries in terms of population. The 4 original members, plus Indonesia, are also part of the top 10 list of countries by GDP in purchasing power terms. And the 4 original countries are among the 10 largest in land area, which is not the case of Indonesia. But you look at Indonesia plus BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, are really by themselves sufficient to produce an impact. And if you add to these 5, the other 5 members, South African plus 4 other new members, you have a group of very important players in the international field. I would like to focus mainly on one aspect of our role in the world economy, which is finance. The reason being that I'm finalizing a paper right now on the financial and monetary initiatives of the BRICS, more specifically on how we or part of the group or part of the group plus a group of global other global south countries, what role can we play in terms of providing solutions for the international monetary system? So let me begin very briefly before entering into specific proposals. Let me speak briefly about the landscape, geopolitical and monetary. The first striking fact, I mean, is obvious. It's the relative decline of the West, of the US and Europe, mainly. Relative and in some aspects, absolute decline. Economic, cultural, moral, even political. No? And the West is no longer capable of playing the role that it used to play in the last centuries. Now, this is one thing. The other thing which we need to highlight is the resistance of the West to this decline, the non-acceptance by the West of this decline, which creates a very dangerous situation for us, for all the world, which is the rather well-known fact that a declining superpower tends to be dangerous, tends to resort to violence to try to deter and even reverse its decline. So this is one basic fact. Is it possible to conceive a situation, given present trends, where China would replace the West as the main hegemon? I don't believe so. It's a long story. I won't be able to go into it in detail, but just in general terms, China is, of course, needless to say, a very dynamic and progressive country. It's doing fine in terms of economics, technology, culture, politics. But China is not as powerful as sometimes people think. Meaning by that, the following facts about China. First, don't forget that China is a middle income country still, far from the level of GDP, PPP, in per capita terms from the one in the West. It's a middle income country in the sense its GDP per capita in purchasing power terms is middle level, upper middle if you want. So it still has some of the problems that emerging market countries have. No? And you know, people forget that China does not even does not even have an hegemony over its immediate neighborhood, because many of the countries neighboring China, for instance, India, Japan, Philippines, Vietnam, have difficulties with China, have fear China because of historical circumstances or present difficulties. So China is not naturally a candidate to become a new United States. And I believe the Chinese are aware of that and are not seeking to replace the United States. So what is the most probable outcome of the decline of the West and the inability of China to step into the United States' shoes? It's a multipolar world. We already have it, and I think we will have it over time for many decades at least. For example, you'll have a pole which will be the West, United States and Europe. You'll have a pole around China, China and some of its neighbors, around India and South Asia, around Russia in its immediate neighborhood, Eurasian community. You can have a pole in South America led by Brazil, although I don't like the word led. Brazil can cooperate with some of its neighbors at least to become a center of influence in the world. The same can be done in Africa, sub-Saharan, if, for example, Nigeria and South Africa manage to organize some sort of extended and intensified cooperation. So it's a multipolar world that we have now, um, that we have now and will have in the next decades, I believe. What about the currency situation in a multipolar world? I think you will have a multi-currency world for a multipolar world. You no longer will have a situation where where one single currency will have a dominant role, clearly dominant role, which was the case or is the case still so far, of the United States dollar. The US dollar is also in relative decline. You have many indicators of that. We can come back to these indicators if you wish during the debate. But the dollar is on a downward trend. Who will take up the slack that the dollar is leaving? I don't believe it's the euro, partly because the euro has become sort of a satellite of the dollar. I don't believe it's the other Western currencies are capable of picking up the slack in a major way, given their size. So the only currency that looks like it could be capable of replacing partly the dollar is the Chinese currency, the renminbi. Now, analogously to what I said about the geopolitical difficulty of China, there's an economic and monetary difficulty for China to take over the role of one of the major international currencies. This is a long story. I don't have time to go into detail. If you're interested, we can come back to that. But basically, to allow a large-scale internationalization of the renminbi, China would need to be ready to give up capital account controls and to allow a possibly very large appreciation of the currency. These two things are dangerous for China. Inconvertibility with capital account controls has been a major factor in the stability of the Chinese economy. And exports have been a major factor in the dynamism of the Chinese economy. We have a saying in Brazil in football, which is, you don't change a team that's winning. Will China be risking its winning team by touching upon aspects that are central to its stability and to its dynamism? I doubt it. The Chinese are very careful. I don't think they'll propose that the Chinese renminbi take up the slack that the dollar is leaving. So what are we going to do? I mean, the dollar is on its way down. The renminbi has limitations. The other currencies can't work. Gold is only a reserve asset with many problems associated to it. So there's room actually for a new reserve currency. And that's I think the discussion that not many, but some experts in Brazil, Russia, China are trying to promote, trying to deepen. There's more than one way of reaching a new reserve currency. Let me tell you in brief outline what I think is my preferred way to create this possible new reserve currency. The first step, that's an idea that comes from Russian economists, and it's actually been on the table since 2018, I'm told. The first step would be to create a new unit of account, a basket of currencies, SDR-like, that would be a transitional arrangement to the new currency. At one point, once you consolidate the validity of this new unit of account, you would move to a full currency, would convert it into a full currency. Who would create this new currency? A group of countries, not global south, not necessarily all Brics countries. You may know that India, for example, has, until recently at least, been very conservative and very reluctant to engage in such discussions. Too bad, because India could do an important job. It has many economists capable of contributing to this discussion. But the government, for geopolitical reasons, which I will not go into now, has resistance to this. So maybe it's not the Brics, it's a group of countries that would include most of the Brics, but not all, plus other global south countries that are not full members of the Brics right now. This new institution would be needed. These countries would have to create a new institution, actually, because none of the existing institutions can do the job well. We can go back to that if you wanted. I don't want to take too much time with this initial intervention. But basically, what happens is that our central banks cannot do it because they are engaged with national issues. The NDB, the New Development Bank, which I helped to create, has a completely different mandate. The contingent reserve arrangement of the BRICS, the monetary fund of the BRICS, which I also helped to create, has been frozen by central banks. Its track record is pretty poor. In any case, it has a different mandate. So, who could do this? A new institution. We could create it from scratch, a small, lean institution with specific functions. This institution would have the role of putting into circulation this new reserve currency. Again, it's not a BRICS currency because we can't be sure that all the BRICS countries would want or be able to join initially. What are the requirements, you may ask, for this new currency to be successful? Let me give you some examples. It has to be a unit of account, so it will have to preserve as much of the unit account role that the basket of currencies initially creates. One way to do that is to construct the basket as a as having a one-to-one parity with the US dollar. This would allow the currency, the unit of account, and later the currency, to piggyback on the dollar's use as an international reserve asset. So you may ask, so you have a basket of currencies starting at parity, but not fixed at parity. It would fluctuate. How? As a weighted average of the fluctuations of the constituent currencies of the basket and of the currency, right? So let's say, for example, China would have 45% of the weight of the basket. The fluctuations of the exchange rates of the renminbi would have a weight of 45% in the basket and in the currency itself. How would we ensure stability of this basket? Well, first of all, look at the composition of the BRICS countries. Brazil, South Africa, Russia are commodity exporters. China is a commodity importer. So is India. So the movements of these exchange rates would tend to at least partly cancel each other out. We could also add some technical features to the construction of the basket that might enhance inherently the stability of such a construct. How would you back? Second question, how would we back this new currency? What anchor would it have? Can it be gold? You know, some of you in the audience are Russians, so I understand. You may have heard proposals coming from Russian economists to back a new reserve currency by gold or other commodities, gold plus other commodities. This is a problem because actually gold is very unstable in prices, as we know, and this instability of the backing would contaminate the stability of the currency. So we need to think of something else. I realize now that I'm trying to explain something very complex in a short, compressed period of time. I hope I'm making myself reasonably understood. But how would the alternative work? First, let me tell you something. There's a straw man out there against which I want to warn you, which is the idea often repeated that a new reserve currency or a BRICS currency is not possible because the BRICS cannot have a unified currency for a number of reasons. That's true, but it's also not to the point because none of the economists that have written or discussed this matter are contemplating something like the euro, the common unified currency. What we would have is something entirely novel, completely different from anything we ever had. Not an international currency, not a national currency playing an international role, like the dollar, previously the pound sterling, no. And an international currency that would play no domestic role, because this currency would be constructed only for international transactions. It would not have domestic use. It would not replace the currencies of the participating countries in this institution that would create the currency. So it's an international currency with no domestic role created by a specific institution. How would it be backed? I come back to the point. Not by gold. How? I think we could construct a scheme that sort of replicates the functioning of modern currencies. The, the new reserve currency would be convertible into new reserve bonds that the issuing institution would also create. And these reserve bonds would in turn be convertible fully, without limitations, into a basket of bonds, weighted basket of bonds of the participating countries. So, for example, the bonds of China, in my example that I gave previously, would be 45% of the basket of bonds that would be the ultimate backstop for the currency. I hope I'm making myself clear. How would this work? If it works in the way that I'm imagining, the outstanding bonds of the issuing bank, the new reserve bonds and the new reserve currency, would be 100% backed by this basket of bonds that would be established. How would this work? If the currency in circulation is put into circulation, the buyers of the currency and the buyers of the bond would provide some amount of resources, some amount of money. The bank would be obligated to convert the entire amount, the entire proceeds from these sales into a basket of bonds, into the acquisition of a basket of bonds of the participating countries. So it would be 1-to-1. If, on the other hand, a holder of a new reserve bond or the new reserve currency wants to redeem it, it goes back to the bank, and the bank redeems the currencies and cancels the corresponding backstop in the form of the basket of bonds. So I may have made a mistake in trying to explain all these technical issues in such a short time that I have available. I didn't want to talk too much and leave some time for debate. But finally, I would like to point out that I'm fully aware of the weak spots that this proposed new reserve currency has. And I would highlight three of them and comment briefly. One is a question: would there be sufficient confidence in the backstop as I designed it? First point. Second point: is the size of China not a problem? And this question also applies to a lesser extent to India. And third, is there a risk of a Western backlash? So let me address these three questions and I'll stop there. First, confidence. You see, a group of sponsoring countries composed of Brics and Global South countries are all middle income countries. Not all of them enjoy great financial reputation. China does. Other countries do, but many are vulnerable. How would the market, how would agents react to a currency, the ultimate backstop of which is a basket of bonds of say, 15, 20 countries with this profile, emerging market countries, fundamentally? That's the first question. How to address it? There are a few ways. I'll just mention the most important one, not to take too much time. I think we would have to allow China to have its weight fully expressed, its weight in terms of GDP, PPP. Looking at the numbers and imagining a group of 15 to 20 countries, China would have approximately, at least I would say, 45% of the group's GDP, 45. India, about 19. What is the problem? The problem is that if you transform these weights into voting power, the bank would be controlled by China plus India, or by China almost alone. Imbalance in governments would make it look like just a facade behind which China would hide. How to solve this? There are ways. The basic suggestion I'm making is that we allow China to play a big role in the financial baskets of the system, but not in voting power. We could use several mechanisms to compress the share of China and India, if India would come in, to moderate their influence on the bank as a whole. There are many questions that can be asked. Would China accept this? I believe it may for reasons that I will not go into now. And finally, the third weak spot is the risk of Western backlash. You know, as I said before, the West is very unhappy with its relative decline. You must understand, we must understand, that the Americans, the Europeans are used to centuries of domination of the world, of dictating rule, and of exploiting countries, exploiting the resources of the entire world, or almost the entire world. As President Putin said once, they must realize that the vampire's ball is over, that the world has changed. But this realization is a hard pill to swallow for the Americans and for the Europeans. They are very proud. How would they react if we put our act together and start to really make a serious effort to construct an alternative to the dollar? Probably badly. They may impose sanctions on the participating countries, sanctions on the individuals involved. You know, they may try to sabotage the new currency and the new institution. That's all possible. You know, but let me ask you, and I leave this question as a final observation or almost final observation. Are we going to be scared of that and just, you know, continue to live with the world, with a decaying system that the West created and manages or mismanages now? Are we going to accept that? Are we going to settle for that? So I think we need to have some, you know, hard thinking, courage. I said at the beginning that the BRICS are a long-term project. I believe it is, you know, that the BRICS are a long-term project. But we cannot discard the possibility that this long-term suddenly becomes very short-term. Imagine a crash, a financial crash in the United States and Europe. Many experts are predicting exactly that. If a crash occurs, people will be scrambling for ideas. An observation made by Professor Desai, Radhika Desai, an Indian scholar. She made this observation in a debate with me on these issues. And I think she's right. I mean, we need to put the ideas on the table before a possible crash occurs. This will be one reason for not delaying too much this discussion. So my appeal to you, young people of the BRICS, Brazil and other countries, I believe Brazilians are majority of the audience, I was told, but there we have people from other countries as well. And I hope we will, you know, Brazil, Russia, China, I hope India could also play a role, are key in this discussion because we're in a very special moment of the world, which is the following. The West no longer has ideas to propose. You don't see any ideas coming from the United States, any ideas coming from Europe. They're in the business of blocking ideas, blocking initiatives, and holding on to their privileges. And our voices need to be heard. We need to discuss these matters openly, deeply. So I hope that I can contribute to this with these ideas that I tried to sketch out to you today. Thank you. I hand back the floor.
Dear Batista, Mr. Batista, thank you so much for your speech. If if our participants have questions, so you can ask, okay? Please tell your name, from where you, okay?
Just a minute, 1 minute, please. The sound is very low.
Sound, can you hear me now?
A little bit better. Let's try.
Okay,
I
and
ask you please to speak up as much as possible because
okay,
I'm having a little difficulty
let's
in
speak.
hearing.
Yes, okay, let's speak loud as loud as possible, as much as possible. Okay.
Oi, tudo bom, Paulo? Consegue me ouvir? Hello? Can you hear me?
Poorly.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you poorly.
Okay, so let's try. So thanks for your explanation. My name is Emerson. I'd like to address something
that you have mentioned, when you're talking about what is needed for the de-dollarization to happen, I'd like to ask, what is needed for each country to do internally? What is each country's homework to do internally to promote the de-dollarization? We understand there are the international negotiations, but what can we do, and if you can address about Brazil internally in terms of Congress, civil society, what is needed for this to happen indeed? And later, if you can comment a little bit that you touch on the subject of the financial crash that is up to come. It's real, it's not, and if it comes, talking about this crash that probably happened in 2027, would Brics be able to protect our countries financially on that? Or to anticipate the de-dollarization?
I think I managed to hear.
Yes, we can hear you.
I got it.
Okay.
Will we listen to a few questions or take one by one?
As it's comfortable for you. Let's maybe collect questions, okay?
Okay.
Earlier on the last part of your, oh yeah, my name is Paula Fani. I am an ex-student of UFRJ for International Relations. I just graduated, and my question would be, towards the end of your presentation, you mentioned that the de-dollarization might cause some conflict between the global north and the global south. And you mentioned that, okay, what are we supposed to do? Just keep waiting for the status quo to change by itself? Of course not. So in case like we do proceed with that and that we do face intervention because of that, how are we supposed to protect ourselves and maintain our sovereignty against these possible intervention we might face in the future?
Okay, next question.
Good afternoon. My name is Gabriel Mendes Andrade. I'm a fourth-year law student at the State University of Rio de Janeiro. I have just a brief question. It's more on the line of, is it really that beneficial, or are the BRICS countries really willing, especially their central banks, are they willing to implement that sort of currency? Do you think that some of them, especially India and Brazil, will be reluctant to implement them? And if so, how can BRICS, how can the New Development Bank counteract this?
Anyone else? Okay, it's okay for now. Mr. Batista, so did you get all the questions?
I did. I managed to hear. Let me try to address them. They are very good questions, sort of complicated. Let me do my best. I believe the three questions come from Brazilians, Emerson, Paula, and Gabriel, right? Now, Emerson, what do countries need to do? De-dollarization is for these countries that we're speaking of, the countries of the BRICS and a few other global south countries, is not an internal challenge in the sense that our economies are not internally dollarized, like Argentina is, for example, and many other Latin American countries. Our challenge is how to protect ourselves in our international transactions from the instability and violence associated to the dollar system. That's the issue. So we need to prepare in the sense that we need to realize that the dollar is no longer safe and that we must seek alternatives, use as many alternatives as possible. Take, for example, Brazil. The Central Bank of Brazil is being very laggard, very late in doing what other central banks have done already, which is to acquire gold. If we now move to acquire gold in larger amounts, we will pay a very much higher price because of the fact that our central bank is a latecomer. So we are fully exposed, not fully, but largely exposed to US treasuries. Exactly the sort of application that used to be safe but perhaps no longer is. No? Is a financial crash a real possibility? And how could the BRICS react? That relates to Paula's questions of how the BRICS could protect themselves against intervention and instability coming from the West. Now, if the financial crash, I'm not saying that it's inevitable, and I'm not predicting anything because nobody knows. There's something about finance that you must realize that it's very opaque. When a crisis erupts, it always comes for you from places that regulators don't expect. So every financial crisis has different modalities. We don't really know what can happen now. Possibly a crash of a bubble in artificial intelligence and tech generally. But we don't really know. But let's assume that a crash does occur, a collapse in markets in the United States. If you remember, when that happened, the last time that happened in 2008, 2009, the Lehman Brothers crisis initially, what happened was something very paradoxical. People fled in the crisis to the dollar, the currency of the country where the crisis had originated. You see, there was a paradoxical safe haven effect. I submit that this will not happen anymore because since 2008, the dollar has weakened. The trust in the dollar has weakened for many reasons, and the US economy has become more fragile. So, what might happen is a flight to gold, driving the price of gold even higher, to the renminbi, to other Western currencies, however they are small. This will be a disorganized flight from the dollar. Look at what this situation would mean for China. China would be facing a massive inflow of short-term portfolio capital. What options does it have? It can allow the currency to appreciate. But then the problems I mentioned before are going to come. Loss of competitiveness of exports, loss of economic dynamism. It can intervene in foreign exchange markets, selling renminbi and buying foreign currency. This means accumulating the assets they don't want that are dangerous, euros, dollars. So in the end, what might China do in this scenario? It might simply block entry of capital, control the entry of capital into China. This is a better alternative, perhaps, but it means that China would move further away from the status of a convertible currency. So there's no easy response to your questions, how to protect against foreign instability and against political intervention, which is, I think, the point Paula was driving at. You see, Paula, all countries of the BRICS, and I believe that all countries of the global south, to some extent, are vulnerable to political pressure from the West, including coming from inside the countries, from forces that operate within countries in line with the interests of the West, of the US and Europe, notably the US. You are Brazilians, the three of you that ask questions, you are Brazilians. You know that in Brazil, there's a large constituency of economic and political interests, media interests that are tightly linked to the US orbit. And they work against any attempt of Brazil to become a major player in a sovereign manner. This is the struggle I've had all my life. This is the struggle that Lula is having now as in his third presidency. It's a battle that won't be fought easily. So that's why I said at the beginning of my talk that I think it's a long-term challenge. You know what surprised me? To learn in conversations with Chinese and Russian scholars and experts that this problem of an internal internal Western linked powers is also the case of China and Russia, which, of course, not in the same manner as here in Brazil or other countries, but significantly still. So finally, Gabriel has raised a very crucial point that few people realize, which is the role of the central banks. Central banks are really a blocking force, you know. Why is that? You see, after years and years, decades of interacting with central banks and reading about central banks, what do I conclude? The central banks of the world, they form a separate community, international, transnational, which refer to the same basic ideology, same basic way of thinking about economics, same respect for certain leadership in the world. So people of the central banks in several countries, in most countries, trained in the US, trained in Europe, think like Europeans, think like Americans, think like the central banks, you know. Think they like most, the central banks of the US and Europe, the thing they like most is to go to the BIS meetings in Basel, you know, and, you know, be together with their peers and their leaders from the Western countries. So central banks have played a really negative force, I can tell you that from experience. But in this proposal that I'm finalizing, I've specifically allowed for that by proposing that the new institution that would be created would be not conceived as being largely run or dependent on central banks. So for instance, governors would be finance ministers, directors would be finance ministry officials or others. Central bank officials could be at most alternate governors or alternate directors. And this understanding should be very clear, because in the case of the contingent reserve arrangement, the monetary fund of the Brics, the central banks ultimately took over and froze the institution. The institution that we created in 2014 to be an alternative to the IMF gradually is frozen as a pilot experiment, small and rigid. Why? Because central banks do not really feel that the BRICS should be in the business of creating an alternative to the IMF, you know? So I tried to respond to your questions, but I may not have done justice to them. I'm ready to take on others if you wish. I hand back the floor.
Okay. Do you have more questions, guys? Yes? Okay. Raise your hands, please. Okay.
Thank you. Central banks for several decades have been politically independent, and in my view, this makes them less democratic and more technocratic. Do you think central bank independence was a mistake? And how do you think central banks can become more democratic?
Who put that question? Who was it? Your name?
Marcos.
Marcos.
Isso.
Okay.
Anyone else? Yes?
Hi, my name is Luisa. I would like to know for you, what are the main economic indicators of de-dollarization? That's just it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Look, Marcos, the question you raise is very important. It's a central issue. There is a dominant view that central bank independence is not only positive but indispensable. And what's the reason for that? The reason for that view is that in developed countries, other attempts to anchor the currency by linking it to gold, by fixing the exchange rate, by adopting rules concerning the expansion of monetary aggregates, all these attempts failed, sometimes at high costs. So in the early 90s, the idea of having a legal anchor, an institutional anchor, in the form of central bank independence gained ground and became, if not present everywhere, mostly the dominant way of defining central banks. So they are legally independent, and that, you know what that means? It means fundamentally guaranteeing relatively long mandates for the leadership of the central bank, long which makes these technocrats, as he said, not, which makes them immune to dismissal ad nutum, dismissal at the will of the political authority. So to dismiss a central bank president or governor when the bank is independent, you need to make the case that the individual in question has violated law, has violated code of conduct of the central bank, etc., etc. So this gives protection to the central bank officials. Now, as you said, what does protection mean? Protection against the political authorities of the countries, including elected political authorities. So technocracy prevails over democracy. What is the theory behind that, besides what I've already said, is that this technocracy holds knowledge, economic knowledge, that is relevant, very relevant to the decisions the central bank needs to take. So let the central bank be in the hands of this technocracy, well prepared, understanding well how the economy works, and leave the politicians a little bit further away, incapable of interfering with the work of this technocratic institution. It's, I don't agree with this vision, you see, because it's a long story, but Marcos, just one basic problem. This central bank that is insulated against political interference is not insulated against interference from the financial institutions, private, large-scale financial institutions. If you look at Brazil, for example, the central bank is very much tied to these financial sector interests. So independence against these interests is not guaranteed. In the previous arrangement, before the Brazilian central bank became legally independent, the weight of the political authorities was a counterbalance to the weight of the financial sector. Now it has been removed, and finance rules. To use a term that has become very widespread, there's been a financialization of the command of the central bank. You see? You get these people there, these technocrats, supposedly knowledgeable. They come from the financial sector. They go to the central bank board. From there, they return to the financial sector. Their career gets a boost from passing through the central bank, you see? A boost in terms of prestige, a boost in terms of remuneration. Provided that these technocrats, when they're in the central bank, play according to the rules. Play according to the rules that are in the interest of financial sector powers, you see? So this is a form of contamination, of control of the regulator by the regulated, of the central bank by the financial sector that it is obligated to regulate. And finally, Luisa asks about the indicators of de-dollarization. There are many, Luisa. Internationally, I mean. First, one indicator is what is the share of transactions between countries that is conducted in dollars. It was much higher than it is now a few years back. So for instance, Russian colleagues that are there may want to confirm this or not, but I believe that right now transactions between Russia and China are almost fully conducted in rubles and renminbi without dollars, bypassing the dollar. The same holds for, not the same, but to a large extent, the same holds for India and Russia, right? Or for Brazil and China. Brazil and China, I don't have official figures, but apparently something like 40% of the transactions between China and Brazil are done in real and renminbi. You remember that the Central Bank of Brazil signed a bilateral swap agreement with the Central Bank of China to allow these transactions, to facilitate these transactions. This is one thing. The other thing is, what's the proportion of reserves of central banks that are denominated in dollars, in dollar assets? This used to be much higher than it is now. It was more than 70%. Now it's down to much less than 60, according to the latest figures. So the dollar is declining. The euro is more or less stable. The renminbi is rising a little bit, and gold has risen quite substantially. So this is another indicator. Further indicator of de-dollarization is the widespread use of the Chinese currency in bilateral swaps among central banks, which goes to show that the dollar is playing a less important role than it used to play, also in balance of payment support or international liquidity support operations. So de-dollarization is, as you know, is an ongoing process. What is going more slowly, though, are the initiatives, because you see, every indicator that I mentioned, Luisa, every one of them is either dependent on national decisions, for example, how you allocate your reserves, or on bilateral decisions, in what currency you denominate your transactions between country A and country B. Now, those that require more action of the BRICS as a group are moving much more slowly, to my regret. Now, last year in 2024, when Russia was presiding the BRICS process, the Russians did a good effort and produced a relatively detailed proposal for an international payment system and messaging system, alternative to the Western control SWIFT and others, another mechanism. You know? It's called the BCPI, BRICS Cross-Border Payment Initiative. Now, what was my expectation was that Brazil would receive this proposal that was endorsed as a basis for further work by the leaders of the BRICS in Kazan, and would work on it, would try to detail and develop it. I fully expected that. I insistently recommended this approach to my friends in government. And we're now in December. What happened? We're at the end of the Brazilian presidency. And so far as I know, nothing. The communique, the declaration of the BRICS leaders in Rio de Janeiro in July just repeated the language used by the leaders in Kazan in 24, calling for further work. So you see, there's a paradox here, because the Brazilian president, as you may know, has been one of the most outspoken leaders in calling not only for de-dollarization, but for a new reserve currency. He has said this at least 3 times in public. Now, I'm sorry to say that these good statements by the Brazilian president, courageous even, are not followed through. They do not reflect themselves in the concrete action of the people in the BRICS process, Brazilians and others. Where's the resistance coming from? That takes us back to the point made previously by Gabriel. According to my information, the resistance comes from central banks, largely, including the Brazilian one. Central banks do not really want to work on a system alternative to the Western control payment system. They don't think it's needed. They are reluctant. The Russians are more inclined to accept, the Chinese perhaps, but the Indians, and there I leave it, India has become a major blocking factor in here. And look, when I say we need to look at the long term, we do, because who's going to chair the BRICS next year? India, the country that has shown itself more reluctant to innovate and to address issues that touch upon the raw nerves of the United States. Why is that? It has to do fundamentally with the geopolitics of India. It has a long-standing conflict with China, as you probably know. It fears China, and it feels that it has to rely on a special relationship with the United States to counterbalance the risks it perceives coming from China. That's very unfortunate, but it seems to be the reality. Now, has this changed in 2025? Perhaps. There's one guy that helps us quite a lot. He's not a BRICS member, not at all. On the contrary, he has given many statements, public ones, condemning the BRICS and threatening the BRICS. This guy is Donald Trump. Donald Trump, for some strange reasons, has specialized in attacking also the allies of the United States, also the traditional allies of the United States. So it slapped high tariffs on India this year, surprising everyone, including New Delhi. It was a shock for the Indians. They thought they had a special relation with the United States, and they were stabbed in the back. No? Some of you may have gone to the Valdai Discussion Club meetings, annual meetings. I'm not. Is Victoria still there? Victoria Parnova. She may remember that not this year, but last, an Indian former minister took the floor and said, "I want to tell you that in India we have built over the years a very special relationship with both sides of the aisle in the United States, Democrats and Republicans. And in any consideration you make of BRICS and so forth, you must take that into account." I wonder what this former minister is thinking now. Was this special relation an illusion? Will this behavior by Trump lead India, to adopt a different stance? I hope so, but time will tell. Hand back the floor.
Okay, Mr. Baristas, thank you so much. Do we have more time? Do you have time?
I have time.
Okay.
There are further questions. I'm ready to.
Do you have questions? Okay, guys, raise your hands who has also questions. We will collect the last part of the questions, okay? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Arthur. I graduated in Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in the Defense and International Strategic Management course. My question is about, you mentioned the internal pressures that we have in Brazil and other countries aligned with US political interests. And I want to talk about the current political influence and communication landscape with internet and AI, and in addition to the fact that most of these communication networks are of North American origin, have North American origin. And do you think that other countries like China can take action to exert more political influence on the population of BRICS countries in this political environment by developing and disseminating Chinese communication platforms, or to spread their culture, or do you think it's only an economic battle?
Okay, next question. Raise please your hands. Okay.
Opa, hello. I'm João Gaioso. I'm an economics student from UFRJ. And I would like to ask you two questions that talk to each other. The first one is if you can talk a little bit about the similarities and differences between the new bank you're proposing and the new financial system you propose. The similarities with Keynes' Bancor, the one that he proposed, that Keynes proposed during the Bretton Woods Assembly, and that eventually lost to White's proposal. And how does your financial system talk with the capital accounts about profit rates and interest rates and dividends? And if it counts at all? Because what I understood is that the system would only account for the actual commercial account.
That's it? Okay, Mr. Batista.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Artur, when I spoke about internal pressures that you see in global South countries, in varying degrees, but even in China and Russia, I'm referring to what sometimes we in Brazil refer to as the fifth columns that exist within countries. By the way, you know where this expression comes from? Fifth column, quinta columna. It comes from the Civil War, the Spanish Civil War, because at one point the Republicans in Madrid were being attacked by 4 separate columns of Franco's forces. And the people in Madrid used to say, look, but worse than the 4 columns of Franco is the 5th column that works against us inside Madrid. And I will tell you that in all my life, since I've been active professionally as an economist since the 1980s, I've always had more problems from this 5th column than from the need to face up to foreign conflicts and foreign pressures directly. These foreign powers, they act through their instruments, through the 5th columns that operate here. They don't need necessarily to expose themselves, because Brazilians and others will do the job for them. You touched on a crucial question, Artur, which is the media issue. The media in Brazil is a very clear example of what I'm saying. I'm talking about now the traditional media, the corporate media, or the legacy media. It's TVs and the traditional newspapers. People don't know this generally, but this main medium, this main traditional media, exerts a systematic censorship over what news are conveyed, over what people can be heard, and which people cannot be heard. It was always like that. I saw this all my life to some extent, but it has become much worse now. Much worse. So people that try to learn about the world and about Brazil by looking at TV channels and main newspapers, they are suffering brainwash in a large scale. That's happening in Brazil, but it's happening in the United States and in Europe as well. What's the counterpoint to that? The counterpoint to that are the non-traditional media, the social media networks, and the channels, the independent channels that operate in several countries. So what can China do? I was recently there for 4 weeks. In China, China has built its own communication network, heavily influenced by the state. You may say, well, it's a sort of censorship as well. It is, but at least these institutions that you have in Chinese media, at least they are working for the country. Whereas the media that we have in countries like Brazil works against the country most of the time. That's the truth of the matter, unfortunately. So when China can play a role, yes, it can. But we must not depend on China to face up to the fact that we need to build a democratic media in the country. We don't have that. tell you information which is relevant about China, about Russia, about the world economy, about Brazilian politics, about Brazilian economics, is simply not conveyed when it is inconvenient to the dominant interests in Brazilian society. By dominant, I mean financial sector, large agribusiness, political powers in Congress, etc. You don't have access to anything that displeases unless you turn off your TV, stop reading the big newspapers, and focus on the news you can get from the internet, from independent channels. But even that is difficult. For example, the Russian and Chinese channels suffer restrictions in their access to countries like Brazil. Do you know that? There are many channels, there are many media institutions of Russia, for example, they are blocked. You cannot watch them. You cannot have them, you cannot have a normal Brazilian have access to that freely. And for example, RT, Russia Today, or Sputnik are very good channels of information. You may say, oh, but they have the Russian point of view, but okay, we're exposed to the American point of view all the time, the European point of view all the time. We would like to have also a chance to listen to the Russian point of view or the Chinese point of view. When I give an interview to a Chinese channel or a Russian channel, when it arrives in Brazil, if it blocks these barriers, it comes with an advertisement. Please be advised that this media is controlled by the Chinese state or it's controlled by the Russian state. So it's a tough life for those that want to see a different world emerge. And finally, I didn't get the name of the economic student from the FRJ, from Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. This question you asked about Bancor, similarities and differences between Bancor and the scheme I'm proposing, is one that has been often asked of me since I started working on these matters. I did not really go back to Keynes' papers on this matter. So there's no direct influence. It's been a long time since I looked at what Keynes wrote on this. I'm planning to go back to it now that I've finishing a preliminary version of this proposal to see what I can learn from Bancor. There's one similarity which is important, which is the following. This new reserve currency that I'm envisaging is, in a sense, similar to Bancor, to Keynes' Bancor proposal, because Bancor would also have been, had it been victorious in Bretton Woods, would also have been an international currency with no domestic role. So this has never existed before. And if it comes into existence, it will be something entirely novel. So I fully understand that people have difficulty in accepting these ideas. You're totally right that Keynes' ideas were expelled from consideration by the resistance of the United States, because by then the United States had realized that in the post-World War II world, the dollar would be king, and that's what they wanted. So they said to the British, look, put yourself in your place. Now we have the control, and the dollar will be the chief currency as of now. And that's what happened. And since 1945, that's the dominant way of thinking. But now it's changing. Now we can go back to ideas that maybe Keynes envisaged or others. Now, you misunderstood me. A new reserve currency would not only be for trade of goods, it would be for all international transactions and for reserve holding purposes. But the institution that creates the currency, that creates the new reserve bonds, that organizes its accounts to produce a 100% backstop in the form of a basket of bonds of the sponsoring countries, this institution, we shouldn't expect it to play too many roles. It's just an issuing bank, relatively simple, much more simple than a central bank, than a modern central bank is. But this issuing bank, it cannot be in the business of trying to solve many problems. For example, whether you control or not your capital account transactions, that's something that will be left to the countries. The participating countries would not be in any way obliged to follow a common approach to this issue and to others, you see. So I'm assuming, maybe wrongly, that you can create a new monetary structure without trying to change everything in the international financial system, which would be much too tall an order for anyone. So let's start with the monetary fundamentals and build on that to reach a solution that might be more beneficial to our Brics countries and to the global South countries. About the Western participation, one question you might ask, should this scheme of a new reserve currency be open to the West? Yes, why not? Let them come in if they want, but they won't come in because they're too proud to adhere to something constructed outside their domains. So I would allow Western countries, if any, to come in, but not in the construction phase of the new bank and new currency. No, because in the construction phase, you would have to have protection against Western interference, and that would be important to keep the West out in the initial phase. But later they could come in. And just to finalize my response to you, I'm talking of the world as I see it now, which is a world split suffering from a severe geopolitical split, right? But who can say, when I'm no longer here on planet Earth, say in 30 years, maybe the situation might be different when you guys are 48, 50, 60. Maybe the situation will be different. Maybe the geopolitical split will have softened. And then we could drive at something even more important, which would be a global monetary system, inclusive of all countries. And then this initiative that I'm proposing that we take now would be a sort of an embryo of this possible future global arrangement. And then Keynes' dreams of a global currency will have finally been realized more than 100 years after he proposed it. Thank you. I hand back the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Batista. Your applause, guys. We really appreciate you to have on our first edition of Brics International School in Brazil. We really appreciate you to give us your time and for such fruitful conversation. Thank you once again so much, guys. Your applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, last information for everybody. Tomorrow, we will have a breakfast here at 9 o'clock. Please enjoy yourself. Can arrive between 9 and 10 o'clock. We'll have free breakfast here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So guys, you are free for today. Thank you for the first day of our Brics National School. We really hope to see you tomorrow. All of the updates will be published in the chat, so do not hesitate to ask if you have questions. Thank you so much once again.